Okay, I hope everyone can hear us. If at any point you feel like you're being knocked off, please write something in the chat so that I know that it's not working. Otherwise, I got a thumbs up that it's working, and I hope everyone can hear. It's been a couple weeks since our last year. We had a bar mitzvah. We had other exciting events going on, Yontif, Shavuos, and we are about to begin Perek Vav, chapter 6 of Tanya. And in chapter 6 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is going to continue where we left off. In other words, from chapter 3, 4, 5, we discussed the makeup, the reality of what the Nefesh Elikis, what the godly soul is made up of, the divine soul. We spoke about the emotional powers, the mental powers, the garments of thought, speech, and action as it relates to the godly soul. But now we have to get a better insight, a better understanding of what is the animal soul. Because if you remember back in the beginning, the Alter Rebbe said that there's two realities that a person needs to contend with within themselves. They have a Nefesh Elikis, or actually he started with the Nefesh Abamis at the end of Perek Aleph, in the end of chapter 1, he spoke about the animal soul, and then in chapter 2 he spoke of Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael, the second soul of the Jew is a Chelik Elikami Mal, is a godly, is a part of Hashem. Then we went on to explain the makeup of the godly soul, the garments, the emotional faculties, the intellectual faculties, and now he's telling us the other side of the coin, the other entity that's in our life that is creating the inner turbulence. It's creating the inner wrestling match that exists within the soul of every single Yid. Says the Alter Rebbe, very, very powerful stuff we're about to read. The Alter Rebbe is going to enlighten us about a reality in our psyche that we have to contend with that's really, really powerful. This is a quote from Ecclesiastes, from Kohelet. God has made one opposite the other. In other words, in order for every single Jew to have free choice, Hashem gave us positive and negative forces within ourselves, within the universe, that we should have the ability to choose. And what's interesting is that both forces, both the positive force, which we spoke about, the Nefesh Elikis, the godly soul, and the negative force, which we're about to speak about right now, the Nefesh Abahamis, the animalistic soul, have the same architecture. They have the same makeup. What does that mean? So he explains, he elaborates. Just as the divine soul, which we discussed, comprises of 10 holy spheros, 10 energies, and these 10 energies are dressed in 3 holy garments. What are the holy garments? So we said the garments of positive speech, positive thoughts, positive action. The same thing is with the animal soul. It has similar makeup, a similar architecture of 10 energies and 3 garments, except that it comes from Sitra Achra, it comes from a negative power, and we'll see soon what the words Sitra Achra actually mean. Where does it originate, this negative soul, this animalistic soul, this negative force? Miklipas Noiga, from the klipa that has some brightness in it, which is the klipa that we spoke about in the beginning of our lessons, that is there, and it's a negative force, but it has some hope. It has some ability for transformation, for change, unlike the 3 klippas that are unchangeable. Where does this animalistic soul find itself primarily, even though it's not a physical thing? Where is it located? So he says, "Amulubeshes b'dama adam." Even though it's a spiritual force in your body, in your existence, it finds itself, it has a point of interaction with the physical body in your blood where it's present. In other words, you get hot-blooded with that negative power, with that negative force that exists within you. And it affects you in your blood flow, in your excitement and your passion. Now, this soul is not just a random entity, just like the Nefesh Elikis has 10 faculties. The animal soul, the Nefesh Abamis, is Klula Me'eser Kisra Misavusa. It has 10 powers, as the Zohar refers to them, crowns of impurity. Crowns of impurity that, why crowns, I'll tell you in a minute, but it's basically the same thing. You have 10 powers of impurity. The reason he says that it's called crowns is because just like a crown is on top of a person's head, just like a crown is located atop of their head, it's not connected to the head, it's just on top of that, it's detached from the head. So too, these 10 spiritual negative forces that exist in a person's life, in a Jewish person's life, is not part of who they are. It's actually detached from who they are. It's detached from their consciousness, from their inner self. It's like an external force that imposes itself on you to try to get you to have negative, to make negative choices and to have negative powers in your life. So crown actually here is not a positive, it's a negative. It's a negative because the only reason we call it crown is because it's disconnected from your consciousness, which is basically the Alter Rebbe's way of saying that when a Jew does sinful things, when a Jew engages with sinful and destructive behavior, it's not really who they are at their core, their inner self, because at their core, they're good and wholesome. It's just a negative force that's part of their equilibrium that God puts them there so that they can have that choice, the free choice, but it comes from the outside. What are these 10 crowns? What are these 10 negative traits, negative faculties that exist in a person, in a Jew? Says the Alter Rebbe, Shem Sheva Midos Rois Habois Me'arba Yesodos Roim. These powers of the animal soul consist of 7 negative emotional powers emanating from the 4 negative elements mentioned above. Mentioned in chapter 1, we mentioned that there's the 4 categories of negative, right? Anger, self-indulgence, shallowness and laziness, which we referred to in chapter 1, connected to the four realities of fire, water, air, and earth. So the negative animal soul that exists within the Jew has 7 emotional faculties that are very much manifest itself in those 4 departments of anger, which is fire, and self-indulgence, which is water, and shallowness, which is ruach, which is air, and laziness, which is afar, which is dirt. It has the same architecture. Just like the godly soul has these 10 faculties, the animal soul has it too. But here's where there's a key difference. As a side note, there's a key difference between the godly soul and the animal soul that exists in a person. The intellect of the animal soul, which produces negative emotions and behaviors, is divided into 3, which is Chachma Bina Das, which is, like we said in the previous chapters, inquiry, cognition, and recognition, the source of the emotion. So here's an important differentiation that we need to internalize, because it changes our perspective in all aspects of the battle between the good inside of us and the negative forces within inside of us. To create a relationship with Hashem that is emotional, in other words, to awaken your godly soul to have a functional, healthy, good, productive bond and relationship that is emotion-based, love and fear and awe and appreciation and fascination with Hashem, it takes brain work. It takes intellectual stimulation. It takes, at a minimum, even if it's not a meditation, it takes a recognition. You see godliness, you recognize godliness, and you think about it, you internalize it, and eventually it leads to an emotional state, which is why previously when talking about the Nefesh Elikis, when talking about the godly soul, when it talks about the 10 faculties of the godly soul, first it mentions the intellectual faculties, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and only later mentions the 7 emotional faculties. But over here, when it comes to the animal soul, it starts with the 7 emotions. It starts with the 7 emotions, because when it comes to animalism, when it comes to negative forces, when it comes to negativity in our lives, it always starts with emotion. It's an emotional tugging at us. It's the natural being of who we are, right? It's a natural regress unless you make a conscious effort to stop the emotional temptation or the emotional interest or the emotional drive to take us to a negative place. It's going to take you there. So you could say it's not fear. It isn't. The way to attain holiness with the Nefesh Elikis takes more intellectual work. But the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, happens more naturally to take us to a negative place unless we resist it. And so, unless we make a concerted effort, the animal soul will absolutely direct us towards a superficial life of self-gratification. It's much easier. So you're not a bad person if you end up doing wrong things. It just means you didn't have the discipline or the education or the self-control. I guess discipline and self-control are the same, to stop yourself from going there. Because it's true that the animal soul has the 3 faculties of intellect as well, except the intellectual faculties of the animal soul come after the emotional. Why so? Because it's only like the intellect that comes to certify that which you're already doing anyhow. Right? The kid says, I want ice cream. He doesn't really know intellectually why he wants ice cream. It's an emotional interest. He's yearning. He wants. It's the willpower. But when the mother says, hey, sweetie, why do you want ice cream? Then he has to come up with 57 reasons for why he wants ice cream. So there's an intellectual component to it, but it's a component that follows the emotion. And for a child asking for ice cream, that could make sense. But for an adult who's trying to have a relationship with their creator, trying to live a life of meaning, and you have these 2 internal forces that are vying for control. The Nefesh Elikis that's intellectually trying to guide you to have healthy emotions, and your animal soul that is emotionally trying to get you to intellectually support the emotional temptations and self-indulgences. It's a battle, and it's sometimes easier to fall and to regress, to go with the natural state of following the emotions of the animal soul, which is why it's so important to learn how to have discipline. And it's so important to strengthen the godly soul, so when the battle happens, you can beat it. And the Alter Rebbe goes even further. He says, because the emotions are relative to the intellect. Which is why a child desires and loves small, trivial things. You ever see what makes a child excited? Okay, today it's more expensive. The kids like crazier things. They want iPhones. But back in the day, you went to the dollar store and kids are happy because they're why are kids emotionally content with things that are of such small value? Says the Alter Rebbe, since their intellect is too small and immature to appreciate anything more valuable. So they're happy with less because their intellect doesn't have the ability. Just like it is with chesed, with kindness, it's also with anger, with gvura. Similarly, the child is angered and infuriated by small things. You ever see what makes a kid cry? The parent says, why are you crying? And they say some silly, ridiculous thing, and the parent's like, that's not a reason to cry. Of course, today the therapists say you should tell them it's okay. I mean, let them cry, but that's another story. The point is, because their intellect is so limited and so immature, so the emotions are they also come out sideways. They come out also in a very limited, without too much intellectual guidance. Because if they had intellectual guidance, they wouldn't. If they had more intellectual guidance, they wouldn't get too happy with small things, and they wouldn't get too sad about small things. The same is true with showing off, and with showing off and other negative traits. Why do people that are immature show off things that are like, okay, big deal? Because their intellect is not either fully focused or fully mature. And so when you see a person who allows their animal soul to control them, it means that they did not take the time to intellectually allow for the stimulation that would bring them to make better choices. So they end up making choices like a child, which when you're an adult and you're making choices like a child, it's not a healthy thing. So, but it's important for a Jew to know, because there's all these random rabbis out there today, Zal sein gesund, may they all be well, but they post things online about how evil people are because they did this sin and that sin and they're terrible and they're wicked. And it's not. The Alter Rebbe's approach is first and foremost to understand how the inner battle and inner psyche and inner quarrel that a Jew has, what that looks like, so that we could know how to tackle it. We could know what we're up against. And some days we win and some days we lose. But at least we know what we're up against and what the battle is. It's a battle of the godly soul that is founded in intellectuality that guides emotion versus an animal soul that's founded in emotion that is peripherally guided by some level of knowledge or intellect. Now that we know that there's literally a match of 10 crowns of impurity versus 10 spheres of Kedusha that exist within every single one of us of Klal Yisrael, now it's not only in the actual faculties, it's also in the garments. And this is where the battle gets even more real, because now it's in how we live our life, how we speak, thought, speech, and action. Says the Alter Rebbe, the Aser Pchines Elu Atmeos, these 10 impure faculties, when a person spends time thinking about negative thoughts that are connected to these 10 faculties, or he speaks about them, or he does them, or acts upon them, of the thought in their brain and the word in their mouth and the power of action in their hands or other limbs, they are called impure garments. Into which the 10 impure powers of the animal soul are dressed at the moment of action, speech, or thoughts. Now, that is a very, very eye-opening reality. Because, first of all, somehow in American culture, and somehow that's even permeated some of Jewish culture, although not from a Jewish perspective, but just it's permeated too many Jews, we have this idea of what good and bad looks like. Person has thoughts that are impure, right? Okay, he thinks sometimes, let's say once in a while, he doesn't look at the right things that he's supposed to look at, some impurity, or he talks about things. I think they called it when the president was running for office and he was questioned about something he said, and they called it locker room talk. So you don't think the right things, you don't speak the right things, but as long as you don't do a crime, in America, they consider you a pretty good guy. If you ask someone, how's your neighbor? And they mow their lawn and they wave to you in the morning and they say good morning and they brought you a chocolate cake when they moved into the neighborhood, you ask you, how's your neighbor? He's a really sweet guy. A good guy. I have a great neighbor. And that's good. We all want neighbors like that. But is that really what defines goodness? Of course not. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that when a Jew does not follow through with discipline and self-control and allows the nefesh ha'ba'amis, the animal soul that exists within him, together with the 10 crowns of impurity, the 10 faculties of impurity, to not only be there in theory, but to permeate the garments in thought, speech, and action, not just in action, but even in thought and speech, where they're utilizing these incredible, 2 of the 3 incredible garments, the expressions of the person, their speech power and their thoughts in a negative way, meaning not negative necessarily because they're hurting someone or they're talking negatively about someone. It's just thought and speech and action that's against the Torah in all that represents. At that moment, you're allowing your garments to become a vessel for the impure powers of the 10 faculties of impurity of the animal soul. And the Alter Rebbe really here introduces something that I remember learning it when I was in yeshiva. It's a paradigm shift. A real, maybe one of the great, I don't know, it's a big word to say the greatest paradigm shift of Tanya, but it's definitely, if there was top 3 paradigm shifts in Tanya, this is one of them. What is it? The Rebbe is going to introduce something that takes a general halachic perspective and doesn't change the halacha, but introduces a new perspective that is very, very different. What does he say? When you open up Shulchan Aruch, when you open up the Code of Jewish Law, it says there's generally our lives are defined, are categorized by three types of behavior. Number one, things that you are religiously required to do. Keeping Shabbos, giving tzedakah, giving charity. Okay. Number one is things you have to do. Number two, things that are prohibited, religiously forbidden stuff, like eating pig, eating shellfish, or stealing. And then in halacha, there's something called an ordinary act, which is neither religiously required nor religiously forbidden, like checking your mail, or buying clothing, or going on a hike. There's no isur, there's no mitzvah, it's not obligated, it's not prohibited. And that is the normal perspective that Juri had without the study of Chassidus, without studying Tanya, without studying this incredible magnus opus of Chabad Chassidism, the Bible of Chassidism, the Torah Shebechsav of Chassidus, which is Tanya. Jews live their lives seeing things in those three categories: Asur, mitzvah, and then neutrality. Comes along the Alter Rebbe here and says it would be a mistake to conclude that there is such a thing as ordinary or neutral reality in the life of a Jew. Either, the Alter Rebbe says, you're doing something that is promoting God consciousness, or you're promoting your own ego consciousness. And it really depends on you, the person. And here's the words of the Alter Rebbe, straight from the boss. He says, it is these thoughts, words, and actions of the animal soul that constitute all the things that are done under the sun, which are empty and a strain to the spirit. Again, quoting from Kohelet. As the Zohar writes, in Parshas Beshalach, Shem Tfiru de Rucha, destructive to the spirit. The Alter Rebbe says there is no such thing as neutrality. Right? Remember when I think it was Bush who said either you're with us or against us? Either you're with God and it's God consciousness, or you are with ego and it's ego consciousness. In other words, even the neutral things that you're going to do, either you are doing it with a consciousness for Hashem, which in that case it becomes a holy action because you're getting the mail and you're taking a hike and you're buying clothing l'shem shamayim with the intention and the awareness that this is a part of the God process. And exactly how that plays out is beyond the scope of today's class, but God needs to be part of it. Or you're doing it with your own ego conscious. In that case, it becomes a destructive force in your life. And the same thing is not just with purchases, it's also with how you speak and think. It says the Alter Rebbe clearly. This applies not only to actions, but also to any ostensibly neutral spoken words or thoughts, which while may not be religiously forbidden, are not consciously directed towards Hashem to fulfill His will or His worship. They automatically are supporting the animal soul because they did not have the awareness and the intention and the intentionality and the consciousness of Kedusha, of godliness. And here the Alter Rebbe says the word Sitra Achra, which is always referred to as the negative forces, Sitra Achra means the other side. We always assume it means the other side of Kedusha. There's holy and then there's unholy. Says the Alter Rebbe, no. The other side means Shazeu Pirush Lashon Sitra Achra. This is the meaning of Sitra Achra. Pirush Tzad Acher She'enei Tzad HaKedusha. Translate as the other side, anything that's not on the holy side. So there's holy, and either you're on the holy side, and everything else in your life, if it's not with the proper intention for holiness, it ends up on the side that's the opposite of holiness. So even the neutral things, if they're not done with the proper intention, they're not done with the proper awareness, they're not done with the proper consciousness, the proper immersion of divinity in your day-to-day neutral activities, then it's not considered holy. Then it not only is not considered holy, it's considered the opposite of holy. So how do you know what's actually holy? Says the Alter Rebbe. Let me see. One guy is lost and confused. Yeah, I see. That's, a rabbi could answer text messages and give a shir at the same time. Says the Alter Rebbe, what is considered holy? That what is the holy side that includes only something into which God's holiness can be drawn and be present. And God's presence will only rest on a thing which has surrendered its ego to Him. Very, very powerful information. Hashem will only rest on someone or something that's bottled, that has surrendered themselves to God. Now, if you're doing something neutral and God has nothing to do with it, then there's no God there. Therefore, God is not going to find himself there. And if you, the person doing the neutral thing, is not in a state of surrender, where you are transcending self, in other words, you're self-transcendent, even in this neutral activity, and thus, through your self-transcendence, through your surrender to Hashem, you have allowed God to peek through into your life, even incrementally, even in small amounts, then it remains an unhealthy, egotistical experience, not neutral. It's on the other side. But if you find bittul, if you allow a little crack where God can come in, I just heard Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, I was driving over here to the men's club, it's 30 minutes away, so I was listening to a podcast, and Rabbi Y.Y. said that that he heard from someone, people used to say that a guy said he always yearned for perfection. He always wanted perfection. And only later did he realize that he actually wants a life full of cracks so that the light can come in. And it's a very powerful word. You know, the Chidush Yarim, I actually heard about the Kotzker Rebbe, but I just read it from Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he says that it was the Chidush Yarim. Either way, the Chidush Yarim was a Talmud of the Kotzker, so they were in good company. But he said, his students asked him, where is God? They were waiting for some big, profound answer, and he said, wherever they let him in. What's pshat? God is available to dwell in our lives at every moment, going to the mailbox and buying clothing and doing mitzvahs and driving our car and taking our kids to school. God is available to dwell in every aspect of that, but we need to be in a state of consciousness of bittul where we are allowing him in, even with a crack. But if there's some level of surrender, saying, I'm going to the mailbox as a servant, I'm not after the kutchabrichu, I am a servant, I'm a servant of Hashem. And everything I do is with the intent of serving my Creator and enhancing His glory in this world and bringing Him into my life, and I allow that crack in because I've surrendered, then it's a holy experience. But if I don't, even if it's a neutral thing, it stays on the other side, which the other side is anything that isn't Kedusha. And he goes further. He says, Bein b'poyel mamash, whether your bittul, your surrender to God, is literal, kemalachim al yonim, like the supernal angels that are totally enraptured with Hashem's presence, or even if it's bekoyach, even if it's inside of you but lies dormant, meaning even if it is not actualizing itself, but you have it within you. Meaning the lowest level of bittul is the surrender, is that it's in your subconscious. Meaning you have a divine soul, you have the ability, the potential to awaken that surrender to Hashem at every given moment. That in itself is already a step in the right direction. Now, if you could just actualize it and allow for the bittul to pop up and open that little crack, like it says in the Medrash, open for me like the size of a needle, the eye of a needle, and I'll open up for you like the doors of the temple, the massive doors of the temple. Every yid, through surrender, through bittul, has the ability to make every mundane activity, even a neutral thing, into a holy activity. And that's a big paradigm shift, the fact that neutrality doesn't exist. He says further, Kichol ish Yisrael amata. This is always true of every person of Israel down here in this world. By virtue of his or her divine soul, the Nefesh Elikis has the potential for complete surrender to God by giving his or her life to martyrdom and serious nafshak to Hashem. Think about it. How come so many Jews who practically were not living as Jews, but when their gun was put to their head, whether it was in the Inquisition or the Holocaust, the pogroms, or even in Eretz Yisrael, when they were put to the gun to their head, they said, we're not going to deny our relationship with Judaism, our relationship with God. Where does that come from? It comes from the dormant bittul that exists subconsciously in the essence of every Jew. That's why later, I think in chapter Yudches, I believe, chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe, and 19, the Alter Rebbe talks about how that plays out. But that bittul is the differentiation. That is the difference between being a Jew who's egocentric, which means you're on the other side, even with your neutral, beautiful, neutral activities, or you're on the side of Kedusha, which is where you allow the awareness and the consciousness of Hashem to play out in every single activity of your life. And that's why our sages have said that even if one Jew is sitting, a single person sits and studies Torah, the divine presence rests on him. Doesn't matter what your spiritual standing is. How come the divine presence rests on him? Because everyone has that bittul. Everyone has that subconscious bittul, that subconscious dormant soul, which allows for the divine presence to shine in. So when they study some Torah, God says, oh, we can come right in. Furthermore, as it says in the Gemara Sanhedrin, that any group of 10 Jews that comes together, the divine presence rests. La'olam, always, even when they're not studying Torah, doing a mitzvah, just 10 Jews coming together to plan to do something holy, to congregate to do something holy, already allows for the divine to come in. Why so? Why does it work that way? Because there's already built into our essence the potential for that bittul, for that surrender to God. And if we actualize it, then we do the greatest activity according to the Alter Rebbe, which is live a life disciplined enough and controlled enough with self-control to stay away from allowing the animal soul to ever conquer and overwhelm the godly soul, and to recognize this great, great reality that anything that isn't holy, according to the Alter Rebbe, is unholy. It's on the other side. It's on the other team. And every time we bring awareness of Hashem into our day-to-day, our workplace, and our exercise, and our most mundane activities, we create that awareness and that consciousness of divine versus the ego consciousness. We are actually enhancing our holy reality, strengthening our nefesh elikis and our relationship with God and our godly soul, and giving us strength so that perhaps on a day when the animal soul is more vitalized and strong, we have the strength of the godly soul that's been strengthened by us through our better choices on better days to overcome those challenges and withstand the temptation and the emotional driven indulgences that the animal soul would like to take us to. And so with that, we'll wrap up for tonight, and God willing, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, next week, we will continue and finish chapter 6, which continues in this journey of this inner battle between the Eser Kisri and the Misavusa, the 10 impure crowns, against the 10 faculties of holiness that exist in our godly soul. I'm going to end the recording, and then if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take it.